Hey there, night owls. Before we sink into tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment if you enjoy bedtime horror stories that chill you to the bone. Tonight's story is called Dead Wife's Garden. And trust me, this one will make you think twice before planting roses under the moonlight. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, and listen closely. Dead Wife's Garden. It was April 3rd, 2022. A quiet Sunday evening in Savannah, Georgia. The kind of evening where the warm spring air still carries a hint of winter in its breath, and the sky blushes soft pink before the dark swallows it whole. Birds were quiet. The wind barely moved the moss hanging from the oaks. And in a pale yellow house on the edge of the historic district, Jonathan Mace stood by the back window, staring at the garden. His hands were still dirt-stained from planting. He'd spent most of the afternoon digging up the rose beds his late wife used to tend so obsessively, cutting away her ivy, ripping out the dead roots of her lilies. He told himself it was time to move on. Time to let the earth forget her. Sarah wouldn't mind, he muttered. But it didn't sound convincing, even to him. Sarah Mace had died the year before, March 7, 2021, one of the first warm days of spring. A car accident. A sharp turn. A tree. The kind of thing people shake their heads about, then forget over coffee. But Jonathan never forgot. And lately, the garden wouldn't let him. It began 3 weeks ago. Just small things at first. The tulips he never planted began to bloom in the exact same place Sarah used to kneel every morning, rain or shine. The wind chimes, silent since the winter, began to tinkle softly whenever he stepped outside. Her favorite songbirds perched by the kitchen window, staring in. And last Tuesday, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the garden lights flicked on by themselves. No power surge. No storm. Just a flicker. Then full brightness like a stage being lit. That was the first time he thought he saw her. Just a shape. A figure kneeling near the jasmine bush. Digging. He didn't tell anyone, of course. What could he say? That his dead wife had come back to weed? But tonight was different. The moment the sun dipped behind the trees, Jonathan felt it. A pressure in the air. The silence grew heavier. The birds had all vanished. Even the cicadas had gone mute. He stepped out onto the porch, heart thudding in slow, uneven beats. From where he stood, the garden looked wrong. The roses he'd dug up yesterday were back. Full bloom. Blood red. He stepped closer, and that's when he heard it. The sound of metal scraping stone. Like a small spade. Clawing into the earth. He froze. Someone was in the garden. Or something. Jonathan didn't move at first. The sound of the scraping, slow, methodical, rose and fell like a breath, as if someone were digging in time with their heartbeat. He stared at the garden through the shadows of the porch railing, barely blinking. A part of him wanted to believe it was just an animal. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe a stray cat. But no cat he'd ever known could move dirt like that. And besides, the spade. He recognized the rhythm. He had heard it for years, every spring morning, just after sunrise. Sarah, digging with her old hand trowel, humming under her breath. He used to joke that she treated her plants better than she treated people. And now, more than a year after her funeral, that same sound had returned. Jonathan stepped off the porch, one slow foot after the other. The grass was damp beneath his slippers, and the night air had gone strangely still. Even the wind had retreated into the shadows. As he reached the edge of the garden, the noise stopped. Dead silence. He scanned the yard. The jasmine bush. The row of lilies. The birdbath cracked from last winter's freeze. Nothing. No one. Just the dark soil and the roses. Dozens of them. Red, blooming, impossible. He knelt beside the patch where he thought he'd seen the figure. The earth was warm. Disturbed. And something glinted in the dirt. He reached down and uncovered it. A silver earring, tarnished and familiar. A tiny pearl in the center, surrounded by a ring of delicate thorns. Sarah's. Jonathan blinked. He was certain he had buried that earring with her. It had been her favorite. She wore it the day they got married, and again the day she died. He had made sure it was in the coffin. So how was it here now? Nestled in the soil as if the garden had coughed it up. He stood quickly, heart racing, hands trembling. A noise broke the silence behind him. The creak of the back door. He turned. It was open. He hadn't left it open. He stepped backward, eyes locked on the house, then turned and hurried up the porch steps, through the door and into the kitchen. The lights were off. He reached for the switch. Nothing. No power. Then, behind him, something brushed his leg. He jumped, almost slipping, and turned around. It was the wind chime. Somehow it had come loose from its hook and was lying on the floor by the door, spinning slowly. But there was no wind. He picked it up, set it on the counter, and exhaled shakily. He needed a drink. Something to steady his nerves. He opened the cabinet, reached for the bottle of whiskey, poured 2 fingers into a glass, and sat at the kitchen table. For a while, he just stared at the dark garden through the window. Maybe I'm losing it, he thought. Maybe the grief, the guilt. Maybe it was finally catching up to him. He hadn't told anyone about the affair. Not even Sarah. Not before the accident. Not after. And when she died suddenly, the shame buried itself alongside her. But guilt is a strange thing. It waits. And sometimes it grows. His phone buzzed on the table. A message. From a number he didn't recognize. One word, dig. He stared at the screen, jaw tightening. He stood, grabbing the flashlight from the drawer, and walked back out to the garden. This time, he didn't hesitate. He went straight to the jasmine bush, dropped to his knees, and began to dig. The soil parted easily under his hands. Damp, loamy, freshly turned. 5 inches down, his fingers struck something hard. He pulled it out. A ring box. The velvet was rotted from moisture, the edges frayed. But he recognized it instantly. He had thrown it away. 3 years ago. After Sarah had found it in his coat pocket and asked who it was for. He'd lied, of course. Said it was old. Said he'd planned a surprise for her but changed his mind. She hadn't believed him. He had tossed the ring into the river that night. Or so he thought. Yet here it was. Nestled beneath the bush she'd planted. Right back where she used to spend her mornings. He opened the box. Inside was the ring. But now the gold was blackened, and where the diamond once sparkled, something else pulsed, a milky, shifting stone almost alive. The garden lights flickered. Then they went out. And from behind the jasmine bush, something rose. It wasn't a figure. Not quite. It had a shape, a woman's shape, but wrong. Too tall. Too still. The head tilted slightly, and in the moonlight, Jonathan saw the glint of something pale where the face should have been. A skull. No. It was a mask. A porcelain garden mask, white with painted red lips, hair made of ivy tendrils, the same kind Sarah had once hung on the back fence as a joke. But it moved. It took a step forward, and the garden seemed to shift beneath it. Jonathan stumbled back, dropping the box, his breath catching in his throat. Sarah, he whispered. The mask tilted as if in recognition. Then the mouth moved. No words came out. Just soil. Black, wet soil spilled from the mouth and onto the grass. Jonathan turned and ran. He didn't stop until he was inside. The door slammed shut and locked behind him. He backed away from it slowly, breathing hard, sweat on his forehead, his hand shaking. This is not real. It can't be real. He grabbed his phone again. Another message. Same number. She's waiting. And below that a photo. It was blurry. Taken from the garden. Taken from behind the jasmine bush. And in the photo he could see himself. Kneeling. Digging. But behind him, half-shadowed, the porcelain face loomed. He hadn't seen her. Not then. His hands dropped the phone. The glass screen cracked on the tile floor. In the distance, the wind finally returned. But it didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like humming. A low, gentle tune. The one Sarah always sang when she gardened. The one he hadn't heard since she died. And outside the kitchen window, the roses began to sway. in rhythm, as if dancing to her song. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the living room couch, facing the dark window, clutching the fireplace poker like it was a sword. His breath came in slow, shallow sips. The humming had stopped around 3 a.m., but the memory of it still circled his thoughts like smoke. He replayed it over and over again. Every detail of the garden, the mask, the ring box, the messages. Especially the photo. The way the figure had loomed behind him, nearly touching his shoulder. He hadn't heard a thing. Not a footstep. Not a breath. It had been right there. He told himself when the sun came up he'd leave. Just pack a bag and go. Maybe call his brother in Charleston. Tell him he needed a place to stay for a few days. Maybe longer. But morning brought no relief. The sun peeked over the edge of the trees like it was afraid to rise. Its light was thin and gray, barely illuminating the dew-soaked grass outside. And the garden. It was beautiful. Lush. Alive. Roses bloomed across the back fence like they had been painted there. The jasmine bush stood tall and heavy with blossoms. The air smelled sweet, inviting. Like nothing had happened. Like the garden was untouched. But it wasn't. The ring box was still lying open in the dirt. And the soil was still freshly turned. Jonathan stepped outside carefully, like he was walking into a trap. The morning breeze moved gently across his skin. He bent down near the jasmine bush, watching the shadows closely, but found nothing unusual. The mask, the figure, the message, all gone. He could almost believe it had all been some kind of dream. Almost. He picked up the ring box again, this time wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a metal tin before bringing it inside. He didn't want to throw it away. Not again. But he also didn't want it near him. He stored the tin in the basement, behind a row of old paint cans. That evening, just before sunset, he got in the car and drove to the edge of town. To St. Agnes Cemetery. Sarah's grave was near the back, under a large weeping willow. He hadn't visited in months. Couldn't bring himself to. But now, standing there with the last light fading across her headstone, he finally spoke aloud. "I know what I did." His voice cracked. "I should have told you. I should have ended it before you found out." He crouched near the grave, resting a hand on the cool stone. "I'm sorry, Sarah." Silence. He stayed for a while. Let the wind brush his cheeks. Let the guilt wash over him like it had so many times before. And then he went home. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. No humming. No scraping. No wind. Just stillness. Until 2:13 a.m. That's when the sound returned. Not outside. Inside. The unmistakable sound of the back door creaking open. He grabbed the fireplace poker again and crept into the kitchen. The door was open, just like before, swinging gently in the breeze. He stepped onto the porch. The garden was glowing. Soft, unnatural light pulsed from the soil itself, like the ground was breathing. Then he saw her. She was kneeling again. Her back to him. The porcelain mask gleaming in the moonlight. Ivy trailing from her shoulders like hair. She was digging. This time he didn't run. He stepped forward. Slowly. "Sarah," he said. His voice didn't shake. The figure froze. Her head turned slightly, but not enough for him to see the face. "What do you want from me?" he asked. No answer. He took another step. The grass crunched beneath his feet. "I'm sorry. I can't change what happened, but I..." The figure began to hum. The same song. Low, steady. Familiar. Jonathan froze. The air around him dropped several degrees. He felt something wet on his bare feet. He looked down. Blood. Seeping up from the soil. Running between his toes. He stumbled back. The humming grew louder. Faster. The roses shook violently, as if caught in a storm. Then, from the ground beside the figure, a hand broke through the dirt. A real hand. Flesh. Bloody fingers clawed their way up, grabbing fistfuls of earth. Another hand followed. Then an arm. And then the screaming began. Not from him. From beneath the soil. The same voice he had once heard whispering, "I love you," late at night. Sarah's voice. He watched, frozen, as a body began to emerge from the ground. Pale, covered in roots and soil. Wearing the same blue sweater she had on the day of the crash. But this wasn't a memory. It wasn't a dream. It was her. She was rising from the grave. His legs finally moved. He turned and ran into the house, slamming the door shut behind him, locking it, bolting it. He ran to the bedroom, grabbed his keys, his wallet, his phone. The phone buzzed. Another message. "Don't run." He dropped it, heart hammering against his ribs. Glass shattered in the kitchen. The back window. He heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. He grabbed the poker and moved toward the hallway. "Please," he whispered. "Please let me go." A soft voice answered. Not from behind the door. From inside the wall. "She's part of the garden now. And so are you." Then the lights went out. All of them. The hum returned. Low and vibrating, shaking the house down to its bones. And with it came a memory. One he had buried. The night he'd confessed to someone. Not Sarah. The other woman. Mara. He had told her everything, sitting in the car after their last meeting. He had cried. Told her he loved Sarah, but the guilt was too heavy. Mara had nodded. Quiet. Calm. And then she had vanished. Stopped returning his calls. Deleted her social media. Changed her number. He had assumed she left town. Or moved on. But now, he thought of the garden. How the soil seemed richer than ever this spring. How the blooms came faster, brighter. How Sarah had always said, "The best things grow from broken things." He turned slowly toward the front window. Out in the garden, there were now 3 figures. 2 kneeling. 1 standing. Watching the house. Watching him. The third figure wore a blue sweater. Sarah. The second was wearing what looked like a red scarf. Mara's scarf. And the third figure, the one standing tall, wore no mask at all. It wore his face. And it was smiling. Jonathan didn't scream. Not when the thing wearing his face smiled from the edge of the garden. Not when Sarah slowly turned her head toward him. No longer masked, but pale, wet, her eyes hollow like deep, empty wells. Not even when Mara lifted her hand in a slow wave, her fingers dripping with black soil, her mouth moving but forming no sound. He just stood there, pressed against the wall of his living room, heart thudding, breath shallow. And then, they moved. Not walking. Not floating. Just appearing. One moment outside. The next. He turned toward the hallway. Sarah stood there. Inside the house. Soaking. Silent. Mud in her hair. Ivy curled around her wrists. Something small wriggling beneath her skin. Behind her, Mara stepped forward. And behind Mara, the one that wore his face. He dropped the poker. It clanged against the floor. They didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Sarah reached out a hand toward him, soft and slow. "Stay," she whispered. "We saved a place for you." Jonathan tried to back away, but the floor beneath him pulsed. Soft and damp like fresh earth. And then, before he could move, roots burst through the floorboards, wrapping around his ankles. He fell hard, gasping, clawing at the ground. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Sarah's face lowering toward his, lips almost touching his ear. She whispered one final thing. "Nothing in this house ever really dies, John. We just grow differently." And then, the garden bloomed. A new bed. A fresh mound of soil. And a single red rose. Still wet. Still warm. And in the early hours of morning, as the sun touched the petals, the rose exhaled.